Hey everyone, welcome to my live stream. It's Paul Tobey here from JazzMentl.com. Thank you for joining me. We're going to spend about an hour together, maybe a little bit less. I've got some things that I want to share with you. The first thing that we're going to get to eventually, that didn't make total sense, the first thing. Okay, the second thing we're going to get to is how I mic my piano. I get a lot of comments about the piano sound, and I wanted to share with you my very simple miking instructions so that you can get the best sound out of your piano. And a couple of small things, actually they're not that small. They're intricate and really important things to help you get the best sound possible. I've always been a big believer that even if you have a great miking system and a great audio interface and things like that, if you're putting lousy sound through that system, you're going to get lousy sound out the other end, no matter how great your system is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I do to make the best sound possible. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, which I'm going to do first, is if you're new to JazzMentl or you haven't spent a lot of time on our YouTube channel, and by the way, if you are a subscriber, thank you for hanging out with us a lot. We obviously spend a lot of time working on music, and there's a lot of things that we cover in our tutorials, but if you haven't really spent a lot of time on JazzMentl, then you might not know entirely about how this all came about and how did I get to this point in my life where I'm putting out these tutorials and just about to release a new album. And that's where I want to start, because I think it's important for all musicians to understand that the path to greatness in music, or the path to wherever you want to get in music, is never a straight line. For me, it was not only not straight, it was fairly crooked, and I got lost several times along the way. So let me take you back about 25 years when I had just signed a recording contract with Arcadia Records in New York City. I was playing at The Hague. There was a conference, jazz festival in the North Sea Jazz Festival, and I did a performance there, and this gentleman came up to me after that performance and said, "Are you being represented by anyone?" Even though we had released albums on our own under our own label, which was, I think, the Jazz Solution label, we didn't have a recording contract, or I didn't have a recording contract. And he said, "Well, I really like what you're doing. Would you consider working with us? I'll take you to dinner, you and Nancy to dinner, and we'll discuss what that might look like." And I was pretty excited about that. So we went to dinner, and he basically said, "I'll give you some money to produce a couple of albums, and we'll give you the option for 6 more. So a total of 8 albums. And I was excited, obviously, because I've never had label support before, and I certainly never got a check for doing things like that. And the check was pretty significant. I won't tell you how much it was, but it was definitely a lot of money at the time in US dollars, which compared to Canadian dollars, it goes a lot further. But not too long after that, even though we released Street Culture, which got a Juno nomination, which is the highest award here in Canada, and I put another album in the can, about this time, I literally blew out my arms with tendinitis. And that's really part of that crooked story that I wanted to share with you, because this was not in the plans, obviously. After having signed this recording contract, I wanted to obviously just play my little heart out and produce as much music as possible, get lots of concerts, lots of gigs, and ride off into the sunset. Now, people like Brad Meldau have a straight path. They were always going to be musicians. They always will be musicians, and they went from point A to point B pretty much a straight line. I'm sure there's things in his life that happened to him, but if music is music and that's what you're doing, then that's the path that you take, and it's fairly straight. And I thought it was straight for me, but then this tendonitis thing came up, and it got so bad that I literally couldn't play. So I went to see Dr. John Chong, who's a pianist who blew his arms out and became a doctor as a result because he didn't have a choice. He was a classical piano player. And he basically said, you're in the exact same position that I was 20 years ago. And if you keep playing and you keep playing the way you're playing, you won't be able to hold a cup of coffee, let alone play the piano in any professional manner. And that was really unexpected for me because I thought I was fairly strong. I was fairly young. I was playing well. I certainly had lots of great technique, but when somebody says to you, if you keep playing, you're never going to play again, then you start to reanalyze where you're at. And so I stopped playing for a while. And of course, as a musician, when you stop playing, you stop getting paid. So money became an issue very quickly. And because of the stress of all of that and this loss of music, which is really the only thing I've ever wanted to do, when you miss that, when that goes away, you start stressing out about pretty much everything. Life, family, everything, money. And then I developed tinnitus. Many musicians have that from playing in pit orchestras or just being around music a lot. Musicians just develop this high-pitched ringing in the ears. And I can tell you that if there's one thing that I miss in my life is silence. I don't know that note anymore. I consistently, in the silent spaces, hear this loud-pitched ringing in my ears, which has actually gotten worse over the years, even though it started off terrible and I was floored by how annoying it is. I've even got videos on YouTube where I talk about tinnitus and some of the things that I do to make it better, and distraction is the number one thing, because for me, no amount of, and I did lots of things like acupuncture, lots of holistic medicines. I even went to see a doctor in Japan once because that was recommended. And no matter what I did, I even did tinnitus retraining therapy, which cost several $1,000s and all of this stuff. It never got away. It only got worse. So now I've got tendonitis and tinnitus, and that's just basically the universe screaming at me saying, hey, you need to figure something else out, because of course you're not making any money and you've got a family to support. So as you can see, and if you have, by the way, any questions about this, just write them in the chat area and we'll see if we can answer them. But I just wanted to have a little chat with you, because wherever you're at and wherever you want to get, I'm sure that that is not going to be a straight line. It may be, but it certainly wasn't for me. And I had to give up music at this point. And we're going back now 25 years. And now the only thing that I've ever wanted to do and was inspired to do and loved to do is now no longer a part of my life. So I went and did something else. And that's a whole story in and of itself. I'm not going to go into the details, but I basically got into business because I'm not really hireable. Most companies don't need a piano player. So even if I put a resume together and tried to get a job, I may end up flipping burgers at McDonald's or whatever, but I don't really want to do that. I wanted to make a bigger impact. So I started re-educating myself, and I got into the business world and started doing seminars, and because I was comfortable on stage. And anyway, that's a whole story. I'm not going to get into the whole business side of it, but I've been doing business now for 20 years. I still have a book of business that I'm dealing with. And then fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic. You may not realize this, but in Canada, and I'm not sure where you are in the world, but Canada had the absolute And my wife, Nancy, wrote a statement down here because she didn't want me to get too political about it. So let me read it. It said, during the pandemic, Canada was very strict and shut down all business operations except for a few that were deemed essential. Now, this was not for a month or two. This was like almost 3 years. This gave a lot of people like me extra time on our hands. And it did, because I had this whole training company that nobody was allowed to attend. I had a 3,000 square foot facility in Toronto that was basically empty of my employees, empty of people coming in to train. And so I had to kind of like think about, well, what do I want to do now? And my arms, I've been playing the piano. Obviously, this piano here has been with me for many years, and I kept playing over the last 20 years. I didn't stop completely, but I certainly wasn't anywhere near the level of proficiency that I was when I was making recordings. But at the prompting of my son and my wife, I decided that I would re-educate myself on the piano. And that meant a couple of things. One, getting my arms back into shape completely, and now I feel like I'm in the strongest absolute shape of my life. I no longer have any arm problems. I work out a couple times a week to kind of help. I do stretching, lots of things that I've learned to do over the years to kind of keep tendinitis at bay. Tinnitus I can't really do much about. I try to protect my ears as much as I can. I even wear earplugs typically when I'm sitting here at the piano because it's loud. And the louder the music is, especially with this piano, with the lid being open, that sound is blasting you and coming directly into your ears, and it makes tinnitus much, much worse. So I try to protect my ears as much as possible. But part of the relearning process for me was to start the YouTube channel. And you may think, yes, I started it for you. Absolutely. I have this thing that I learned in business. If you help enough people get what they want, which is you, whatever you want, if I help enough of you get what you want, I can get what I want. That's kind of how the universe works. A lot of people don't know that. They just look after themselves and their small family unit and really never think about how much of an impact can I make. But I knew from business I'd made a big impact, especially as a trainer. And so when I started the YouTube channel, I started it for two reasons. One was to help you progress as a musician. But two, as I'm doing that, I'm relearning myself all the things that I knew and adding new things to that because I'm constantly researching great ideas for videos. I'm hearing other pianists. I'm listening to other people on YouTube. I'm listening to music more than ever before because now I kind of spend a lot of time doing that. And I'm getting better as a musician as a result. If you want to actually progress a lot as a musician, help someone else who's not at your level get to your level. Because as you're doing that, you're deeper into the mechanics and the concepts of music, plus the emotional side, right? Play from the heart, all that kind of emotional side of music that a lot of people miss. And as I'm training this YouTube audience to get better as musicians, I'm progressing much quicker than if I had have just sat here and practiced and kept everything to myself. And that brings me to a kind of point where I really feel like it's a good idea now to put out a new album. So we just solicited some comments on the Facebook channel for 7 covers that we had mocked up, and people can choose which one they like. So we're really in the process of releasing this new album, which will be coming out, I think, June. Hiring a PR person. I don't have a recording label. Things have really changed a lot. I'm not even sure that's necessary anymore, the way that music is released. It's really all about Spotify views or listens. So as I'm recording, and this is the part where I'm going to tell you how I mic the piano, because this is the piano that I'm using for the recordings. It's a solo piano album, which is quite ambitious, really, if you think about it. When I used to release albums, not just for Arcadia, but on the label for ourselves before Arcadia, when you did a trio album or a quartet album and I did a tentet album, which is kind of like a small big band, did a whole Latin album like that. When you go into the studio, you have a finite amount of time because, of course, the clock is ticking and every hour costs money. So you're in, you're out. But you have the support of a lot of other musicians, so you're making music together. When you make a solo piano album, every single note is open for discussion. So if you make any kind of mistake or your ideas are not formulated fully or you get out of time, there's this whole process of making solo piano music that is much more difficult, really, I think, than playing with a trio, because if you want to stop playing with a trio, you just let somebody else play. That's the way jazz is. It's a discussion. So if you want to stop commenting, you just basically comp and let the bass player take a solo, things like that. So putting this solo album together, I can do that in this studio that I built in my home. It's not a complete studio. There's not baffles everywhere, but it's a nice kind of bright sounding room, and the piano sounds great in here. But the process of miking it is what I wanted to talk about, because as I'm releasing this album, I want to make the best sound possible. So there's a couple of things that you need to know about miking your own piano. So this is the part where you can either just bookmark this part of the video, or you can take notes if you want to. I want to share with you the miking process for me, which is actually fairly simple. So number one, you're going to need a decent set of microphones. I think it's kind of overkill for a lot of people to like mic with 4 microphones or even 6 microphones, because that just complicates everything. And really, I initially just started miking it for the YouTube channel to get the best sound possible. So let's just, we're going to play in a little bit to kind of round out the hour. I wanted to share kind of the learning process for me of how I go through tunes. But essentially, when you're playing the piano, you want a great sound. The mid-range of the piano, which goes from like C3, so this is C1, C2, C3, C4 is middle C. So from about C3 or even like F2 up to kind of like C6. This is kind of like the mid-range of the piano. So to me, this is the most important area, because this is where you spend the most time playing, especially with solo piano. I mean, obviously when you're soloing, you're up in the upper range. So you want to make sure that this area of the piano is voiced properly. And voicing means that the hammers are a certain amount of softness in order to strike the string with not too much harshness. Because the E-Bach piano is quite bright in general, meaning brighter than, say, Steinway or Bosendorfer. So the hammers are voiced for me specifically because I basically spend some time voicing them. And then making sure the piano's in tune, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in a moment. But the miking for this piano, for me, can't be too close to the bridge. So if you actually, and I'm pointing to the 2 microphones up there, I'm using these 2 microphones. So let me give you, I'm going to open up a window here to kind of let you see the microphones that I'm using. it's too complicated to move cameras around in live stream to do this, so I'm basically just sharing with you the microphones that I'm using, which is Rode M5s. Now, they are not expensive microphones. I think, in fact, do I even have, I think I brought up a link on Amazon, so you can see $269. And a lot of people think, hey, you can't possibly get a decent sound with $269 microphones. Well, I do. Now, I've been talking to the engineer because the recordings that I'm making and taking to the engineer, his name's Mark Rogers. He has a studio close to here, 20 minutes away, actually, which is very convenient. Shout out to Mark. If you upgrade the microphones to like $2,000, you're going to get a better sound. Now, it's all about you get what you pay for. So for this particular album, I'm happy with the way it sounds, but for the next one, I'm definitely going to be upgrading the microphones, but only 2 of them. Because again, if you've got 4, it just makes the whole process a lot more difficult, especially when it comes to engineering. And that's it. That's the sound that they're getting from the piano. So they're about 2.5 feet, right situated underneath the bottom of the lid. So if I go back to here and close this window and come back here, you can see, and again, I'm pointing like the keyboard towards the microphone. It's about, what? Is there a problem, Nancy?
No, you're just not on the camera.
Well, I knew that. It's because I put up okay. Thank you, Nancy. She's like, you're not on the screen. Well, it's because I just threw up a window momentarily. This microphone, they're kind of like even, and the first one points to this bar on the piano to kind of catch the mid-range to upper register, and the other one is pointed to the lower bar, which is that big one over there. So this, let me see, that bar there, that's where the second microphone is pointed, and the other one is pointed to this bar here. So they're kind of like separated. Now, a lot of people put them in X to kind of keep the phase correct. If you don't know about phase, you might want to look at, do just Google searches for microphones out of phase and how to fix that. I got fairly lucky with the placement of these microphones, and there is no phase problems. In fact, there's actually gear in a studio that you can use to fix that. But you really want them in phase before it goes into what we call the audio interface. And the audio interface that I'm using is this one, and I'll throw up a picture in just a second. So that's what we call a UMC 404 HD. Now, again, not super expensive. I think it's like $500. It's not a lot of money. And this was the second thing that I talked to the studio guy about in terms of making sound better. If we just upgraded the audio interface, which basically converts the microphone audio sound, which is analog, to digital. That's what it does. It's like a digital to it's like an analog to digital converter. Plug the microphones in it. The preamp is all like contained in one unit, and then that goes directly into the computer, into your recording software, which I'm not going to talk about. You can use any recording software. I use Reaper, which is basically just a digital audio workstation, or a DAW as people call it. And that's my entire recording process. Now I take the recording, which is raw, and I take that into the studio for mixing, basically raising levels, putting on reverb, putting a little bit of compression on, and obviously EQing out certain sounds, mid-range, whatever. Just kind of working with the EQ to make the piano sound as great as possible. And that's all that there is to it. So I get a lot of questions about that. And what I can say is, even though that process is simple, and yes, if you buy better gear, you're going to get better sound. So for the next album, I'm going to buy better microphones. I'm going to buy a better digital audio interface. And that's it. I don't need to do anything else. I don't need a whole mixing console, whatever. If I want to do that, that's great, but that's a huge investment because you got to build a studio and you have to have the right speakers, and it's an endless money pit. And I'm not really interested in that anyway. I'm interested in making recordings, not being an audio engineer. So the best thing that you can do, in addition to good microphones and a good audio interface, is have a good piano. Now, I talked recently about my piano. In fact, the last Saturday I did a live stream. If you want to reference that live stream, it's the one previous to this, where I talk about the piano, the whole piano story, how I got it, where it came from, what I paid for it, all those kinds of things. But the number one aspect of making a great piano sound for me is not just obviously having a nice instrument. That's key. But even if you have a really nice instrument and it's out of tune, even like slightly, and I was playing a little bit earlier, if you listen to the unisons on these notes, there's no phase. All of the unisons are in tune. Now, it might not be perfectly in tune with the C up here or whatever, but as long as it's within, like a fraction, it's going to be fine. But the unisons are the most important thing. So at least learn how to tune unisons before doing a recording. So I tune, before every single tune that I'm going to record, I spot tune unisons, because there's 3 strings for each note. And you want to make sure that those 3 strings are completely in tune with each other. So if you listen to this note, we're good. We're good. And you'll be able to hear it. As soon as you hear unisons that are out of tune, you'll hear it. All good? So there's one string that's just ever so slightly out of tune. I know it's hard to hear. And then this is the one I heard earlier. So there is one string here that is more than just a little bit out of tune. And most people won't hear that, but if you have that on more than one note, it can, no matter how well you mic your piano and no matter how great your piano is, it's going to sound terrible. Tuning is the absolute most important thing, and that's why a lot of people use keyboards, but you cannot release a jazz piano solo album playing a keyboard. Some people have done it, but they're using like a Rhodes, which is like a real instrument, but an electronic keyboard for a jazz piano album, not solo. There's no way that's even possible. And if people have done it, hey, more power to you, but that's for most listeners, especially audiophiles, that's never going to work. Make sure the piano's in tune. Now, if you don't know anything about tuning and you want to start and you have your own piano, I have a series of how to tune your own piano here on YouTube. When this video is rendered after I'm done, we'll post a link. So there might be a link up in the corner now, because depending on when you're watching this, I had time to put the link in. So if there's one there, great. Or below this video in the description, you might find a link to those videos where I talk about tuning. And at the beginning of those videos, which are very popular, by the way, I can't believe how popular they are, people are coming on, and the first thing I say is, I'm not a piano tuner. And people are like, oh, he's not a piano tuner. Why is he teaching me how to tune piano? Because you don't need to be a piano tuner. You just need the right instruction and a little bit of equipment, and away you go. So watch those videos, because it's going to save you a ton of money, and your piano is always going to be in tune, which is really important when you're making recordings. So for me, that's key. The piano's voiced properly, and I'm not going to talk about how to voice hammers and things like that. It's basically taking a pick and jamming it in the hammers and make them a little bit softer. It's a process. You really want to do that correctly. I've actually watched other piano tuners voice my piano over the years, so I know how to do it. But again, it's not, you have to pull the keys out, the board out, and then basically work the hammers over one by one. It takes a very long time to do that. Great voicing, but obviously making sure the piano's in tune, and you're golden. And then no matter how you mic it, it's always going to sound great. Now, obviously, you want to follow the instructions that I've given you. I did talk a little bit, and I should reiterate, about the microphones being a little bit of a distance. The reason why we do that, and they're up there and not like directly on the keyboard, and a lot of people do this like really close miking process, is because the piano makes a fair amount of noise. When you, especially, listen to this. If I let keys up, you hear that? That's noise. So you want to make sure that the microphones are not picking up. I mean, obviously they're going to pick it up, but you don't want that to overwhelm the actual sound of the piano. And the closer you get to the hammers and the dampers, which is basically this, when you release the keys, it makes noise. So keep the microphones a certain distance, but it's also going to get the full sound of the piano as well. If you have any questions about miking, you can, if this is live, you can ask them in the chat area and we'll try to answer them. If you are watching a recording and this was pre-recorded, then just put your question in the comments. And by the way, at this point, if you could, I would really appreciate it if you could like this video. It helps it reach more audiences. I'd really appreciate that. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you're more than welcome to subscribe. We'd love to have you. I'm going to turn my attention now, because for me, this is kind of like a normal Saturday practice session. I'm going to turn my attention to a new piece of music, which I knew in the past. And the reason why I'm going to do this is because there's been a lot of chatter about Bill Evans on this channel. If you've been paying attention to the polls, every time we put Bill Evans as one of the choices in the poll versus others, people are inevitably choosing Bill Evans over Keith Jarrett, over Oscar Peterson, over a dozen other piano players. So there's obviously a lot of interest in Bill Evans' music, and people want to learn more about that process. So I am going to be making some new videos coming up. I do have some things where I talk about Bill Evans and Bill Evans' sound. There are a number of videos already on this channel, but I'm going to do it even more because there's still a huge interest. So let's talk about performing something that Bill Evans does. We're going to look at Bluesette. So let me just pull that up. And I'm going to throw it on the screen here so you can see it. So it's a fairly simple tune, 3/4.
Hey everyone, it's Michael with Behringer, and today we're going to be talking about
earlier with my tinnitus. I'm just first going to put in some ear protection.
4x4 USB audio MIDI interface featuring 24-bit, 192 kilohertz audio file resolution, and high-quality Midas-designed mic preamps for crystal clear recording signals.
Just annoying.
Designed and engineered in Germany, the UMC 404 HD makes for an ideal recording companion while at home or in the studio. And because it's compatible with Windows and Mac-based operating systems, it will work seamlessly with all the most popular DAW software available using just a simple USB 2.0 cable connection to your computer. For recording purposes, on the front you
I think it's off now. It can't be on anymore. So thank you, Nancy. Nancy just pointed out that some video is playing in the background, and I apologize for that. Hopefully it wasn't too annoying. So like I said, we're going to take a look at Bluesette now and just learn it together, because I haven't played it myself in a long time. So again, the first thing that I do is just play the tune through simply, as it were, just looking at the changes that are in the real book. I probably will go listen to Bill Evans perform it again, or a couple other piano players, to kind of hear the changes that they're using. And when we get into reharmonization, we can use some of those ideas. All right, let's just play a little bit of it. And then what I might do is start thinking about, even at this early stage, how to make that sound better by putting in nicer chords and chord progressions. So the first thing that I thought about when I saw this line going up, which is just part of the B flat scale, just starting on 5. So when I see a line like that, the first thought that pops into my head is, from a chord progression standpoint, is Barry Harris's 6th diminished scale. That's really hard to say, by the way. 6th diminished scale. Say that 10 times really fast. When you make every other note in a scale, and whether it's major or minor scale, you can make every other note a diminished chord, which is based on 5/7. So 5/7 of B flat is F7. And if you go F7 flat 9, that's your diminished chord. It's basically that. This is the flat 9. So wherever that fits in the scale. So for example, if this is the first note, which is the 5, you can go up the scale, and every other chord is a diminished chord. You hear that? You can't do it here because it doesn't fit here. So this is, and then change the chord. Okay, one more time. So a lot of people would play 1 major 6th, because that's why they call it the 6th diminished scale, because you're playing 6th chords. So B flat 6, inversions of that. So it's really G minor, and then sorry. There's our first chord, second chord, because you can't use that note because it's not the melody. So just kind of working your fingers, and you're basically playing octaves on the outside. And then thinking about inner voices, right? So instead of B flat 7, it's B flat 7 with a flat 9. So one more time. I love those minor 2/5s, right? Just trying to find good voicings for minor 2/5s. It's hard to do it when the 5th is the melody, so it's basically an 11th. Okay, in the melody. So it's a little harder. And that's a good indication, the last 4 bars. Take a look at that. D minor 7 to D flat 7. That's basically a tritone substitution of G7. So instead of going like this, it's line cliche going down in the bass. And even F7 should be B7. So one more time. That's a good example. D minor 7, D flat minor 7. It's got a 13th in the melody. Whenever I see that, I'm thinking using a sharp 11, which is the C natural. It's a nice sound. Force, right? Force here, force. Well, this is a tritone. Then force, then force, then your sharp 11, and then the melody. So it's like this A flat over C7 sharp 11. But if you put a G in the bass, it's G7 with a 13. G flat 7 with a 13. Okay. Listen to that. Beautiful. We could take time to work out the 6th diminished scale for that one as well. Should we? So you have to think about this because it's not a normal, I mean, obviously B major 7, which we hardly ever play there. So F7, so the 5th of B is F sharp, and then you've got, this is your diminished chord because it's an F sharp 7 with a flat 9. So then we're going there, right? Play the diminished chord in its inversions and then figure out how it fits into the scale. Right, let's go here. Not an easy thing to do. You have to work it out, basically. So. I probably won't do that the next time around, especially if I'm playing it fast, because it's going to take some time to get that under my fingers. Again, even as a professional, there are things you need to work out. They just don't come easily. Okay, it's a little easier with, obviously, the first part, because you're playing in B flat a lot more than you play in B. There's another opportunity to put a sharp 11 in there. So once you're at this point, then think about swing, because obviously we're in 3/4 time. So thinking about you could think about Charlie Brown. What's the voicing for that key? Let's see, what is it for C? Basically the 5th in the melody, so B flat here. The scale. And of course, at this point, what you might want to think about is some simple soloing ideas just to kind of work your way into the tune and then find ideas out of that soloing that you can add to your reharm. So let's try a little bit of that. So the idea really is to just cover, initially with simple soloing, it's just to kind of cover the chord changes themselves. So for example, B flat major 7, like a now you have to keep changing the inversions of those arpeggios. So for example, this is first inversion. That would be second inversion. And then when you transition to a new chord, you're playing a different inversion of that chord to match where you ended up with the previous one. Because if you just did all first inversions, it would sound like this. It doesn't even out because, of course, you're playing in 3/4 time. But that doesn't sound like soloing. It's mixing and matching the arpeggios interspersed with lines as well. Turn this microphone off because I'm making a bit of noise. A lot of times you have to breathe when you play. So that comes through on this microphone. Let me turn it off because it's probably annoying a bit. That's actually a neat idea to think about when you're practicing, is to start a phrase on a different beat. So let's start flip phrases on beat 1, then we'll start phrases on beat 2, then we'll start phrases on beat 3, just as a little exercise. what I did was I did the first 4 bars starting on beat 1, then I did the next 4 bars starting on beat 2, then I did the next 4 bars starting on beat 3, and then the next 4 bars will start back on beat 1 again. So just, it's a good idea to do that because your phrasing changes when you start on a different beat. Let's try that again. Yeah, your fingers get tied up sometimes in ideas. So you can see that even it's a process for everyone. that's just a little bit about some practicing ideas. Again, I think the whole idea of starting on beat 1. Microphone. I have to remember to turn that back on. Anyway, what I was saying was when you practice, especially soloing, I think it's a good idea, like I said, to phrase things differently by starting on a different beat. Now, you can even start on the end of the beat, which is a little trickier. So, for example, I put it back on, Nancy. You can do that on beat 1.5, beat 2.5, and then beat 3.5 as well. But it's a little trickier to think in those terms. So starting on beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, and then if you want to make it more complicated, start on the end of the beat. That's all the time we have for today. If you are watching a recording of this, please like and share the video. We'd really appreciate that. And if you're not a subscriber yet, please join us here on the channel. We are a little channel that could. We'll get there one day. In fact, I want to be at least 25,000 subscribers by the end of this year, and we're on the path to do that. The current statistics are looking like we might make it. So help us out, like the video, share it, talk to your friends about us. We'd love to have you. And I hope you learned something today. Again, if you have any questions, put them in the comment area, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks so much for your time. We'll see you next week.